Watching News at Prime, let's get into another important discussion now. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today telling a United States Senate delegation in Jerusalem that his troops are fighting like lions. Israelis are today marking the first anniversary of the surprise attack by Hamas, which killed around 1,200 people. This led to Israel embarking on a military offensive in Gaza, which has led to the deaths of over 41,000 people. 2 million others have since been displaced in the enclave. Fighting has also spread to neighboring Lebanon. Well, let's reflect on this region now, the Middle East region, with the University of South Africa's Professor André Thomashausen. Professor, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Listening to the Israeli Prime Minister today, he says that his troops are fighting like lions. But can he say convincingly to the people of Israel that his country is any safer today than when it was when Hamas attacked the kibbutz area back in October 7 of 2023? That country now involved in multiple confrontations within the Middle East region.
No, of course not, because that attack was unexpected. It took Israel by surprise. And I do think that Netanyahu feels guilty about having neglected proper security priorities and having allowed too much relaxation on the border, trusting in his strategy together with Qatar of coaching Hamas into becoming a more tame, a less combative movement. We all know that there was a strange scheme of channeling money to Qatar and from Qatar to Hamas, basically to buy the leadership of Hamas, and that was a fundamental mistake in the assessment of Sanwar and the other leaders who only lived to defeat Israel and, as they so often proclaimed, to destroy it as a state in their region.
Very interesting phrase you use there, Professor, that Netanyahu feels guilty about what happened on October 7. Last night, I had the opportunity to talk to the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, who didn't mince his words, that Netanyahu engineered what happened here, which possibly talks to exactly what you are saying about trying to buy off the Hamas leadership. And his view is that perhaps the best thing Netanyahu can do for the Israelis is to resign. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, no, I don't agree, because now Netanyahu is in a very similar position as Putin. The war escalation and the many countless acts of bravery, and of course also the victims in this war, the Israeli fallen soldiers, they have strengthened his popularity. Just like Putin, his popularity is now way above 60%. That happens when a maybe unpopular leader engages in war. All the patriotic sentiments become fervent. So there seems to be no way out. There is no turning point in sight. And the dramatic change that we are observing is that the post-World War II order, which was essentially Eurocentric, the Conference of Yalta just before the end of World War II, reunited only the United Kingdom, United States, and the Soviet Union, and they decided on the new United Nations order. Yes, South Africa also played a big role in it with Jan Smuts, who was then Churchill's basically right-hand man. But that order focused on the Holocaust, on the horror of National Socialism, where Europe had united together with America in defeating it. And this is how the convention, the Genocide Convention, came about. But the South, the modern South, doesn't see it like that. For the modern South, slavery and colonialism are the central human crimes And the whole story of the Holocaust and how the United Nations came about is moved into a far distance. And now Hamas is gaining the support of the global South, just as so many people had commemorations today. There were also so many demonstrations that were actually celebrating what Hamas did on the 7th of October. There are even restaurants that have sprung up with the name of 7th of October. This is deeply painful, of course, to all Jewish people because it celebrates something horrible.
Yeah.
The taking of the kidnapping and taking of hostages and the barbaric slaughter of bystanders, of people that had nothing to do with this conflict.
Professor Thomashausen, any loss of life will surely be regrettable for either side. And I've got to point out that human suffering has been the most extreme. I think the wars that were reported many, many years ago, whether you talk World War I, World War II, some of us have to watch movies in order to try and connect to exactly what was happening. Today, we see that in real time because of the technology and the amount of loss of life, yes, from the Israelis, 1,200 people, and then you combine that with the losses that Israel is also beginning to incur in terms of their troops as they try to mount a ground offensive in southern Lebanon. They have started counting casualties, but then you can't compare that to the amount of suffering that the people of Gaza have seen. 41,000 lives lost, Professor, and many of those are civilians. What is the end game here, do you think?
Well, conflicts will only end when there's a moment of ripeness, when the pain on each side becomes so great that even a bad ceasefire, a bad cessation of hostility becomes more attractive. I find it is astonishing how Hamas has managed to capture the world attention with these casualties, because whilst they're happening, we are counting about 1 million dead people in the Ukraine. Russia has probably lost in excess of 200,000 people alone. We are looking in Sudan at about 2 million dead. And not long ago, when the United States waged their war against ISIS in Iraq, basically all observers came to the conclusion that 1 million civilians lost their lives. So the Gaza conflict is one where the loss of life is not a very absolutely frighteningly big picture. The Israeli Defense Force has maybe lost by now 80 or 90 people, which is in any kind of war situation insignificant. So I don't think that the loss of life will help us reach a turning point. The turning point may well be reached with developments inside Iran, where one strange death after another has occurred. The Iranian leader Ibrahim Raisi died under the strangest of circumstances. He was put into an American-made helicopter that was overloaded, and he was flown straight into a mountain, while 2 other Russian-made helicopters that were flying alongside did not fly into that mountain. And there have been a couple of other strange things happening in Iran, all triggered by the very extreme, very brutal repression of civil society and women especially after the tragic death of a young woman in jail after she was found to have been careless with her headscarf. So Iran may very well become what the Soviet Union was in '89, the country that will undergo a fundamental change, and that can, of course, then open the door to a much more lasting settlement, because the fear factor would be removed. Today, Israel feels existential fear mainly because of Iran.
I talk about the end game, you talk about the turning point. There does seem to be sentiment, I'm not so sure I have heard from the Prime Minister of Israel this sentiment. It's, for my side, it's the political observers, the commentators. And there are those who hold the very extreme view that the Hamas is weakened, Hezbollah is weakened. These fighting groups, these fighters, as they call themselves, they see themselves as liberation fighters of their people. Of course, Israel will refer to them as terrorists. They are understood to be funded by Iran. And so the view is that with these weakened groups, perhaps this could be the time for Israel to mount an attack directly on Iran. Is that where you see this going?
It will not happen before the American election. America will not support a direct attack on Iran because they have their hands full. But after the American election, it could be a green light for a vaster operation. The essential thing here is, what are Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran actually fighting for? It's certainly not for the type of society that any South African would want to live in. It is the last big repressive orders. They're militarized. They completely deny gender equality. They completely deny women's rights. And their only motivation is the destruction of Israel. And I don't see a mid to long-term perspective in that. It will crumble. Let us hope that reasonable countries like Qatar, like the Emirates, United Emirates, like Saudi Arabia, they are betting on modernization, on a new and modern society, that they can reduce the level of the use of force. Because at the moment we're seeing escalation in the use of force daily, and it is very dangerous because nobody can assure us that there are no nuclear weapons in that region ready to be used in the case that one or the other side starts losing out. Right. So this is why the whole world is worried, why South Africa is worried. And I do hope that the original intention of President Ramaphosa to mediate can come to the foreground, rather than to continue judicial activism and verbal support to one side only.
Professor Thomashausen, thank you very much for your time. He is with the University of South Africa. Let's take a break. When we return, we'll bring you a little bit more of our leading stories, and then we close it.